Regular business meeting of Waynesboro City Council. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. It's been about a month since our last meeting. For those who are in attendance, if you wish to speak during a public hearing or citizen comment period, please sign up in the appropriate sheets in the back of chambers. And Mr. Lee, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Item 3 is the adoption of the meeting agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Age. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And the agenda is approved, 4-0. Okay, item 4 is matters from mayor. I do not have anything this evening, so we'll move on to item 5, matters from city council members. Does anybody have anything they would like to share?
I would just like to remind everybody that Waynesboro High School has its opening football game this Friday night. Everybody needs to be there and cheer on our young men and young ladies on the sideline to hopefully have a better season than we've had in a few years past. So everybody come out to Waynesboro High School, kickoff's at 7 o'clock.
Thank you so much. Anybody else? No? Okay. Item 6 is consideration of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Allen, and do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Any discussion? Okay, no discussion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 4-0. Item 7 is to hold a public hearing and consider adopting an ordinance regarding an application to close and vacate approximately .677 acres of unimproved streets and alleys along stated areas of Ohio Street and North Augusta Avenue. Ms. Tate?
So if you'll remember from your meeting on July 24th, the staff presented this request, and tonight's the public hearing. So I will briefly review the request again, not only for you, but for any members of the public that might be here for the public hearing. So as was previously discussed, this is a request to close and vacate approximately .677 acres of unimproved streets. And it's described as Ohio Street along Block 40, Lot 1, and Ohio Street along Block 42, Lot 12, and then also North Augusta Avenue between Block 40, Lots 1 and 2, and Block 42, Lots 12 to 16, and 4 feet of Lot 17. And that is shown here on this depicted map in blue. This just kind of shows the location, so if you're looking back down in between those two buildings in that area, it would go back and then kind of spread out behind the building on either side to represent the area that the applicant is interested in purchasing and fencing in. So the applicant is David Harner, president of Haley, Chisholm and Morris, would like to request the vacation in order to fence in that area that was shown in red and to store fencing and other materials there that's related to their business. As was previously presented, all 3 citizen viewers indicated that vacating these 2 sections of street right-of-way would not inconvenience the general public nor negatively affect any of the abutting landowners. Staff notes that there's no impact on the city's transportation network. Public sewer main does terminate in North Augusta Avenue prior to the portion that they're requested to be vacated, and a public water line extends into the vacation area, and the applicant has arranged to have that portion terminated. The adjacent property is also owned by the applicant. The determination of the land value, as is required by ordinance, the area of the proposed right-of-way is .677 acres. The city assessor used the per square foot value of Block 40, Lot 1 for $1.35 per square foot to determine the assessed value of the proposed right-of-way, which is $39,817. Staff recommends approval of the draft ordinance as shown on the proposed plat. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Ms. Tate? No? Okay. I hereby open the public hearing.
No one has signed up to speak, but it's our habit to allow the applicant an opportunity to speak if they so wish.
No? Okay. Then I hereby close the public hearing. This ordinance was introduced and seconded at the July 24th meeting, and unless there are any further questions or additional discussion, I will call the question. All in favor of adopting the ordinance closing and vacating .677 acres of unimproved public streets and alleys as described, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that passes 5-0. Okay. Item 8 is to hold a public hearing and consider approving a certificate of public convenience and necessity under the City Code Section 94-41 for the operation of a taxi cab or vehicle for hire to be licensed by the City of Waynesboro applicant Halleck On the Way LLC. If I said that wrong, please correct me. And I'm going to call on Mr. Wilhelm.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. On February 27th of this year, Halleck Along the Way owner Alden Ray Hall submitted an application for a taxi cab driver's permit to the Chief of Police for consideration. Through background investigation, Chief Shaw determined that at the time, Mr. Hall met the statutory requirements to conduct such a business in the city. So he issued him a taxi cab driver's permit, which is valid for a period of 1 year back in February of this year. Unfortunately, we had the changes to the code section going on at that time. Mr. Hall decided that he wanted to wait to apply for a certificate of public convenience and necessity until we got the amendments done to the code section where he could use an app-based taximeter. Mr. Hall came down to the police department last week to have his vehicle inspected. And unfortunately, he was unable to comply with numerous code sections for the City of Waynesboro Code and also the Code of Virginia. Tonight, we are scheduled to have a public hearing. It has been advertised. It would be staff's recommendation to open the public hearing and receive any comments on that, and then I would have some recommendations after that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilhelm. All right. I hereby open the public hearing, and do we have anyone signed up to speak?
Well, Mayor Williams, we do not.
Okay. Then I hereby close the public hearing, and I'm going to call on Mr. Hamp.
Right. So, under the code, the council must act affirmatively in public to decline the application or deny the application. So, by virtue of a simple motion that the council does not find that the applicant has met the standard under the code, and therefore we're not, or it's not granting the certificate of public necessity. Sufficient? That's correct.
Do I need to make a motion in second?
Yes.
Okay, so do I have a motion to decline?
Can I, just
Yeah.
point of order question? Is there, in terms of the non-compliance, is there the capacity, ability to table the item until, or is it, are there multiple issues that don't seem to be, that we couldn't resolve in 30 days? Or?
At least 7 or 8 that would take several months to
Okay.
remediate.
Okay.
I'll make that motion to
Deny.
deny the request.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Short. And do I have a second? Okay, and all who declines or denies the motion to approve, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed? Okay, that has been declined. All right, we will move on to item number 9, and that is to receive a staff report and consider introducing an ordinance regarding a text amendment to amend City Code Sections 98-7, 2.5, notice and public hearing of the city zoning ordinance 74-38, public notice prior to preliminary plat review of the city subdivision ordinance. Ms. Michelson.
Could you give us 1 second,
Sure.
Madam Mayor? Leslie, do you have a copy of this? Why don't you take it? We're going to have Ms. Tate present this item.
Okay, thank you.
So this is the state code that changed in July about notice requirements. And so prior to any public hearing for land use applications, the state code did read that we would have to notice 2 weeks consecutively prior to that public hearing. And it could be no closer to the public hearing than 5 days and no more than 21 days. So we had always operated under that. And our City of Waynesboro's code referenced that section of state code, but it did more than just reference it. It went into detail in describing those specifics. So when state code changed recently to kind of get rid of that, it still requires the 2 consecutive weeks prior, but it just says that you cannot advertise, that first ad cannot run more than 14 days before the intended date of adoption. And so rather than spell that out in city code so that if it were to change again, we just amended the city code language to reference 15.2-2204 as may be amended from time to time. And so tonight is just to introduce that ordinance.
Okay, are there any questions? No. And do I have a motion to introduce the ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short, and do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any discussion? This ordinance will be subject to a public hearing and receive final consideration at the September 11th regular business meeting. Item 10 is to consider introducing an ordinance amending the city Chapter 98, Article 2, General Zoning District, Sections 98-2.6.4 of the Code of Waynesboro, City of Waynesboro. Ms. Tate.
Okay, thank you. So this is a request for a zoning text amendment for Section 98-2.6.4. So the applicant requested an amendment of this section, and the section title is Residential Area and Dimensional Standards in Our Non-Residential Districts. So the request is to, or the request from the applicant was to remove or loosen that density restriction that's currently shown in Part C, and that's specifically in our business districts where we permit in our non-residential districts where we permit residential uses. And so the proposed section that we would be eliminating would say, except in the CB district, multifamily building parcels and upper story residential units in non-residential districts shall not exceed a density of 8 units an acre. So to kind of provide a little bit of context, in our business zone districts, we do allow some residential uses, and specifically, kind of carving out commercial business, but all other types of business, highway business, mixed use business districts, and our local business districts, we had this density restriction of 8 units an acre. So when the applicant approached us, the question was, why is that restriction within the ordinance? So I will point out that sometimes in business zone districts and other localities, they might not allow any residential and business. Sometimes they allow residential upper floor, but require kind of a base level tenant. And so the thought was, this seemed like a pretty restrictive density requirement, and that if amended and removing that, it wouldn't be a by right that you could have multifamily or residential development in our business districts, but that it could come before council and you could look at business zone parcels on a case-by-case basis. So the ordinance permits multifamily buildings in our non-residential districts, and those are the several that I've previously listed. The upper story residential currently is also permitted by right in most non-residential districts. However, a conditional use permit is required for our light industrial district. So Section 98-2.6.4 regulates the area and dimensional standards for those residential developments in the business districts. And these are the other standards that are part of that section that we're not proposing to amend. So first is that the area and dimensional standards for single-family detached, 2-family houses, corner lot duplexes, and multiplexes shall be the same as in the RG5 district. Area and dimensional standards for townhouses and multifamily building uses are established through the conditional use permit review process. However, in the highway business and commercial business districts, no townhouse or multifamily building shall be established on a parcel less than 20,000 square feet. You see there the restrictive 8 units an acre we would be proposing to remove, and then leaving in place that upper story residential is permitted on the upper floors of a non-residential building and would comply with area and dimensional standards of that principal building. And this just shows the proposed change would be to eliminate the 8 units an acre standard for business. And really, again, that just allows someone to come forward with an application, whereas before, if they were coming forward with any kind of application over 8 units an acre, we wouldn't even accept it because our code wouldn't allow us to. So it allows for more housing options, but at the discretion of council where and when it makes sense. So for approval criteria for the text amendment, it requires that the Planning Commission and City Council consider the following 6 criteria when evaluating the text amendment. So whether such amendment is consistent with good zoning practice, the public necessity, convenience, and general welfare to the extent such factors are pertinent to the subject matter of the amendment, the extent to which the proposed text amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the remainder of the zoning chapter, the extent to which the proposed text amendment represents a new idea not considered in the existing ordinance or represents a revision necessitated by changing circumstances over time, whether or not the proposed text amendment corrects an error in the chapter, and whether or not the proposed text amendment revises the chapter to comply with state or federal statutes or case law. So the amendment removes the density limitation but leaves the other requirements intact, as discussed. Part B allows for the area and dimensional standards, including the density, to be set during the CUP process. So you would essentially be defining what that density would look like through the conditional use. So the proposed change would allow for the CUP process to be what determines that density and really allows the project to be examined on its own merits and appropriateness to any given site. Staff is recommending approval. The Planning Commission held a public hearing and also recommends approval. And that's all I have unless you have any questions.
Anyone have any questions? No? No questions. Okay. Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance amending the City Chapter 98, Article 2, General Zoning District, Sections 98-2.6.4 of the Code of the City of Waynesboro?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. And do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? Okay. This ordinance will be subject to a public hearing and receive final consideration at our September 11th regular business meeting of City Council. Item 11 is to consider introducing an ordinance granting a conditional use permit to allow multifamily buildings in the HB Highway Business District at 651 Town Center Drive, tax map number 60-1-56B, and the rear portion of 150 P. Buckley Moss Drive, tax map number 59-1-1, portion, Waynesboro, Virginia. Ms. Tate.
So these requests kind of go together in the fact that the applicant requested the text amendment, so then they could come forth with a conditional use permit application for apartments at this location. So this is at 651 Town Center Drive and a portion of 150 P. Buckley Moss Drive. As we've already discussed, multifamily buildings are allowed in the Highway Business District by a CUP. The specific proposal is for 4 to 5 story multifamily buildings with a total of 252 units. The conditional use permit application is tied to the zoning text amendment that we previously discussed, which amends the 8 units per acre density restrictions. The location of the property you can see here off of Town Center Drive and right along the city's border with Augusta County. And the blue outline shows the proposed parcel. So conditional use permits, they allow for a case-by-case review of uses which may be but are not always compatible with neighboring uses. When evaluating conditional use permits, the proposed use must be found to be consistent with good zoning practice, no more adverse to health, safety, or comfort of persons living or working in the area than uses generally permitted in the district, and no more detrimental economically or otherwise to property or improvements in the surrounding area than uses generally permitted in the district. This aerial shows the surrounding uses, so the subject parcels are outlined there in red. You can see there's some single-family residential development that's in the county. Obviously, the Target, Kohl's, McDonald's, Discount Tire, and you can see obviously also the Bright Transit stop that's there at that business location. So the comprehensive plan does identify the parcel for commercial retail, but I will also note that the comprehensive plan encourages more compact residential development that's close to areas of intense activity, where this would certainly be one of them. Multifamily development is reasonable given the proximity to transit, shopping, and other amenities at that location. So Section 98-2.6.4 that we just recently discussed sets the residential and dimensional standards in your non-residential districts. The subject parcels meet the minimum lot requirement of 20,000 square feet. The lot area for the multifamily buildings is over 11 acres. However, it does exceed that density requirement of no more than 8 units an acre, so if the corresponding text amendment is approved, the density would be set through the conditional use permit process. The applicant's concept plan proposes 5 multifamily buildings with a total of 252 units, and one of the proposed conditions would limit that development to 252 units, which is approximately around 23 units an acre if you're just looking at the part of the property that's planned for the residences, but if you look at it kind of more holistically with the business out parcels, it would obviously be a lower density than that. So this is the concept plan that the applicant proposed. They are showing 3 different out parcels for business, and that's up on the property where the current P. Buckley Moss is located. And then you can see the 5 different residential buildings, multifamily buildings, some stormwater management area, a pool and clubhouse. And you can also see the landscaped buffer shown kind of around the entirety that would provide that buffer from the residences to the businesses and also to the southern border with the county. The applicant has provided this schematic or this rendering, and they do note in the proposed conditions that the buildings would be representative of what is proposed here. So the proposal is for 252 units on the 11.15 acre parcel, so approximately 23 units an acre. That is 3 more units than what our regular multifamily district would permit, although we kind of talked with the applicant about, whether it made sense to try and divide it up to reach that number or really just think about the site more holistically and that those 3 business out parcels are kind of part of the overall mixed-use development. Applicant has proposed that the development would be limited to that 252 units, that the development would be in general conformance with the concept plan that was just shown and with the architectural stylings and materials that are provided on the building elevations that were submitted with the application. For transportation, the concept plan shows 1 main entrance to the development from Town Center Drive, and I will point out that Town Center Drive is a private road and that the entrance at that location, they have worked to get that approved on that private roadway. The concept plan does show 2 additional entrances, a right-in, right-out at Town Center Drive, and that would be across from the existing right-in, right-out at the tire. Discount Tire, and then they are also showing a right-in, left-in, right-out on Rosser Avenue. One of the conditions notes, though, that just with these 3 entrances shown, that doesn't mean they're necessarily approved, and that entrances would be reviewed and approved during the site plan stage. Staff does note that a traffic study may be required during site plan review to determine if there are any additional traffic improvements needed, although the property is currently zoned highway business, and any by right business use would likely be a higher traffic generator than the residential uses. This just outlines those 3 separate entrances, so you can kind of orient yourself. The 2 on Town Center Drive, and then 1 out on Rosser Avenue. So the development will certainly increase pedestrian activity in the town center area as there's shopping, restaurants, the Bright Transit stop, including the Afton Express, and the carpool lot. Much of the surrounding area does have sidewalk infrastructure. A proposed crosswalk is shown on the site plan, and the applicant notes that that would be subject to permission from the town center owner. The applicant proposed and staff worked with them on a condition to address pedestrian safety concerns, and that condition reads, pedestrian conductivity shall provide a safe, walkable route from all dwelling units and shall include a pedestrian crossing of Town Center Drive, provided the crossing is permitted by Waynesboro Town Center or their successors. The applicant will use all reasonable commercial efforts to gain permission for the installation of the pedestrian crosswalk at the developer's expense along Town Center Drive. And the applicant did note at the Planning Commission meeting that they have received approval for that proposed crossing. And you can see that that is boxed there in red. So now looking at potential impacts to adjacent properties, the property is surrounded by commercial development on 3 sides and single family on the southern side in Augusta County. A Class B buffer would be required between commercial and residential uses. The Class B buffer is 15 feet wide and contains 1 evergreen tree, 1 canopy tree, 2 understory trees, and 16 shrubs every 100 linear feet. And staff did recommend that that buffer be provided also along the boundary with the county. And that has been shown on the applicant's concept plan. In the Highway Business District, the maximum height of buildings is 50 feet. However, Section 98-2.6.4 does permit area and dimensional standards to be set during the CUP process, including building height. So we did discuss several different designs with the applicant. A flat roof may have met the height requirements, but the applicant preferred to do a pitched roof and noted that the maximum building height would then be 64 feet 10 inches. It's obviously more aesthetically pleasing than the flat roof, and the applicant did propose a condition that would limit the building to that height, as is shown here, and you can see where that would just be at that tallest point, not kind of consistently throughout the building. This is just another building schematic elevation shown. Public water and sewer are available at the property, and water and sewer requirements will be estimated during the site plan review process. So the site is appealing for multifamily residential development with the proximity to the interstate, transit, restaurants, and shopping. It's somewhat, a unique site in the fact that it's kind of landlocked in that it, without that frontage, the one parcel that's in the back, not the P. Buckley Mall property, but the one in the back, doesn't really have access except on that private roadway. And so you are working with a private entity and trying to get permission for that entrance. The development would provide interconnectivity between parcels, which would help distribute traffic, and the pedestrian accommodations help ensure safe access to the surrounding amenities. So staff does recommend approval of the application with the following conditions, and the Planning Commission did also hold a public hearing and recommend approval. So I will go over the conditions. The development would be developed in general conformance with the conceptual layout plan that you've seen this evening. I've already read the one about pedestrian connectivity. Building elevations would be in general conformance with the materials and architectural styles that were submitted in conjunction with the application. The building height would not exceed a maximum of 64 feet 10 inches as depicted on those provided building elevations. The property will be subdivided in general conformance with the submitted concept plan, which shows kind of the one parcel for the multifamily buildings and 3 different business out parcels. The entrances shown on the concept plan are for conceptual plan purposes. Approval of the conditional use permit will not necessitate approval of those entrances. Entrances would be evaluated and approved through site plan approval as appropriate with the different necessary agencies. And then lastly, the maximum number of residential units would not exceed 252. The applicant also did provide this rendering that shows the kind of architectural styles and building design that is proposed. And that's all I have unless you have any questions, and the applicant is here to present on the request.
Are there any questions? No?
That was Leslie. Nope.
No? Okay. All right. Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance granting a conditional use permit to allow multifamily buildings in the HB Highway Business District at 651 Town Center Drive, tax map number 60-1-56B, and the rear portion of the 150 P. Buckley Moss Drive, tax map number 59-1-1 portion, Waynesboro, Virginia.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Short, and do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion?
Just had maybe just one point of clarification, I guess, for the next meeting related to the out parcels fronting on Rosser. Is just really, I'd be interested to have sort of an opinion from the applicant or staff as to the management of traffic. Those would still be commercial businesses, and they're wholly relying on and essentially an on-site internal traffic control. So instead of because they're not an outbound left turn to Rosser, it's wholly designed to navigate traffic. So I'd be curious about was there consideration, or could there be consideration for a full access at the entrance shown on the residential development component, which is just to the, I guess that would be just to the east of the proposed right-in, right-out on Town Center Drive. It's really more about the CB uses on the Rosser side. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. And so we've heard a motion. Do we have a second? And there's no more discussion. This ordinance will be subject to a public hearing and receive final consideration at the September 11th regular meeting of City Council. Item 12 is to hold a public hearing and consider introducing an ordinance amending the fiscal year budget, 2024 budget, in the amount of $3,546,698. Mr. McCormick.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. So the main purpose of the attached budget amendment is to continue work done during the 2024 budget process. As you'll recall, we adopted our annual budget that was our operating budget during May of 2024. During June of 2024, May of 2023. During June of 2023, we did an appropriation of the 2023 budget to effectuate the capital plan. The main intent of this amendment is to appropriate monies for minor maintenance paid for out of fund balance. So if you will look at your detailed listing of uses, that is what the majority of those uses are. These items were outlined in your city manager's recommended budget. A couple of things that are unique to this year that I would like to point out is since the end of the budget process, we've received bids back on the South River Preserve and the Rockfish Run projects. In discussions with Public Works staff and with Public Works staff and Parks and Rec staff, they recommended that we use $175,000 of stormwater funds, transfer those to the capital improvement fund to cover that project in its entirety. The reason for that is Public Works doesn't feel that it has a project that would be a better bang for their buck than what the realizing that Rockfish Run project to its entirety would be. That's one thing that we may have to monitor some, because stormwater funds have to be used for stormwater purposes, so we'll monitor that project and make sure all those funds get used. If they don't get used, they'll just revert back to the stormwater fund. The other item in the listing that's a little bit unique and pretty large is the digester cover replacement. Again, as you'll recall, during the end of May, early June of 2023, one of the digesters at the sewer plant ruptured, and as part of the process working through that, staff's working through kind of three different opportunities, potentially using a loan to pay for parts of that, potentially using insurance to pay for parts of that, and potentially having to use the own funds net position to pay for that. So in order to continue down the road of understanding what we need to do, staff's recommending going ahead and appropriate the funds so we can get engineers on site and get them working on the design of the projects. We will get, council has already approved staff to apply for the Virginia Wastewater Loan Program. We should hear back from that in February or March. If that ends up being an option to take that money, we would recommend use of those funds. If insurance ends up covering the digester, we would recommend use of those funds. And if neither of those opportunities work out, council would have to use net position from that fund. And this ordinance contemplates that third option as a worst-case scenario to give council kind of a preview to the next meeting. In order to recoup those funds out of the bond, the Virginia wastewater bond, council would need to do a resolution, a reimbursement resolution. We have had our bond counsel draw one of those up. We will bring that to you at the next meeting. That does not require you to take the bond. It doesn't even require you to ask for those specific items for reimbursement. It just continues to allow council the opportunity to ask for those back. If we do it before, we can. If we wait until after we've incurred the expenditures, we cannot. The other item that's come up kind of since the end of the year are some grant funds for the schools that make up a large portion of this. Those are wholly grants. They're Title I, 6B grants that are entirely supported by the school system and their grantors. There's no city funds in those. This item does require a public hearing because it's greater than 1% of your currently adopted budget. You can hold that public hearing this evening. If council desires, you can introduce and second the amendment this evening, discuss it, and then it would flow to your consent agenda at your September 11th meeting. If council has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Are there any questions for Mr. McCormick?
Do you have an idea of what specifically is being repaired at the amphitheater?
So, yes. Just 1 second to pull up. So it's a recoding of the amphitheater substructure, and it just notes that the amphitheater substructure is beginning to rust and is over 35 years old. So in order to ensure the safety and longevity of the structure, staff would like to stop the rusting process. So I assume they would stop that rusting process with a recoding of the substructure.
Okay, cool. I was curious if it was anything related to vandalism or otherwise. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? No? I hereby open the public hearing. Mr. Hamp?
No one has signed up to speak.
Okay. I hereby close the public hearing. Is there a motion to introduce the ordinance amending the fiscal year 2024 budget as recommended?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Wood, and is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Any discussion? Okay. This ordinance will receive final consideration at the September 11th regular business meeting of City Council. Item 13 is to receive a presentation from David Shaw, the Chief of Police, on the department's 2023 annual report.
Hey, Madam Mayor, members of the council, city staff, thank you for inviting me. I'm aware tonight's agenda is full, so I'll be cognizant of your time. I've got about 15 slides to go through. And one of my slides in here will be talking about leadership changes we've had recently in the department due to some retirements. So tonight, the command staff came with me to introduce themselves and also in their new positions. So if I can just take a moment, introduce Alyssa Zulig. She was the Services Division Commander. She's now the Investigations Division Commander. Ben Lemons, he is now the Division Commander for Patrol, and Jamie Dunn is the Support Services Division Commander.
I'm going to applaud them. Thank you.
So briefly tonight, what I'll do, and I know we're pretty far into 2023, but I will go over some highlights from 2022 from our annual report, give you some department highlights, statistics from the crime and traffic statistics, 2023 status of our take-home vehicle program, because that's been a hot topic, department activities so far this year, and then, of course, offer opportunity at the end for any questions or discussion that you may have. So in 2022, despite staffing availability, the department maintained law enforcement services and made positive impacts with the community. One thing to consider when we were coming into early 2022, we were just coming out of a lot of the restrictions with COVID, and it was a prime opportunity for us to re-engage with the community. We had some changes within the department, myself included, so it was a good opportunity to get out and participate with the community and reconnect with those that we work with. So we participated in over 40 community outreach and special events throughout the year. Two of the highlights that were during that year was the first one was the On the Road Collaborative that we did at Kate Collins, working with that program with after-school youth in the middle school age range. And then also, it was the beginning of the Present Patrol that we did. Present Patrol was a joint effort between the police department, the Police Foundation, also the public school system here in the city to interact with the kids during the holidays and provide some opportunities to them. One of the big things we did going into 2022 is we wanted to get information out there. We wanted to be able to share and be more transparent with the community, so that was through a social media initiative. We already had Facebook. We were dabbling with Twitter, also Instagram. We added that, and one of the tenets that we wanted to do in that was also because we've had new officers, new leadership, was we really emphasized on the department members and introducing them to the community and putting out information to share with what was going on, whether it was crime-related events, traffic alerts, or staff events and community events as well. Another thing we did was we changed up how we were doing recruitment. We worked a lot with the Human Resources Department, which was great to help us in finding some ways that we hadn't necessarily explored or had used in a while. Some of that was we went back out to re-engage in the community through job and career fairs. We did a lot of changes with our social media updates in order to share information on recruitment through social media and also internet search engines. We found ourselves in the world of Indeed and some other job site search engines to expand our capabilities to reach people in different capacities in order to try to entice recruitment and also hiring. Our take-home vehicle program, through last year, we were able to get all the captains, sergeants, corporals, and detectives an assigned take-home vehicle, and we were also able to start assigning out to the patrol officers their vehicles. And one of the benefits to that is it increases visibility in the city and also improves our response time. Whether it's an officer that's coming to or from work or puts more vehicles out there. It was a blend of some unmarked vehicles and marked vehicles, but it increased our capabilities for the officers to be able to be out in the community more. Next, we added 2 teams on our K-9 program. Officer Matt Danich, he has K-9 Nala, and Corporal Brandon Moyer had K-9 Mickey. These were brand new teams. They went through extensive training up in the Culpeper region in order to get the required certifications, training, and experience, and they have since been deployed about a year now on the street, and they're making an impact as far as interdiction efforts. Next, computer crimes and related information, evidence on electronic data or cell phones, computers. That's become a real prevalent issue as far as crimes nowadays in the modern era. So one of our detectives who's very well versed in working through computer crimes and software downloads, we were able to increase our internal lab capabilities as opposed to having to send downloads, outsource them to other police departments or the Department of Forensic Science, which was increasing the wait time to get the results back, so we're able to be more self-contained on doing our own information. And the last thing we did on that was we reinstated the department's internship and ride-along programs. Those were suspended during COVID, and we brought those back as well. The internship programs were through local colleges, and the ride-alongs was to afford individuals the opportunity to come out and experience a ride-along with the police department. So calls for service, 2022, a lot of things were coming back online. The total calls we had, 22,598 calls for service during 2022. If you break that down, that's an average of about 62 calls in a 24-hour period. In comparison, 2021, we averaged about 53 calls per day in a 24-hour period. What I'd draw your attention to is with staffing and also the intensity or the level of the amount that the calls require or what the officers get involved in, that's a significant number that we've worked with. We're not quite back up to where we were before COVID. However, those numbers so far, when I last ran them at the end of July, we were about 14,000 calls so far this year. So we still got about 4 months to go. We get to some statistics. Fraud. stuck out. It's a 5-year high that we had as far as calls for fraud. Just to break that down a little bit for you, a lot of it was online fraud. We had about 39% of those were false pretense type crimes, which could be credit card fraud. Checks are still prevalent in crime, so check fraud. Larcenies from vehicles was about 16%, and the others was various types of fraud, such as ATM, debit card fraud, and wire fraud. As far as drug and narcotic offenses, the two prevalent types of drugs that we're seeing a lot of has been, of course, fentanyl's been in the news a lot, and also methamphetamine epidemic. That's what drives a lot of those numbers. So arrests, what happened in 2022 was the courts came back online. When I say that, the dockets were minimalized a lot during 2021 with COVID. So the courts started coming back online, bringing cases back in. Of course, with the increase in calls for service, our numbers went up as well. But what you see here is examples such as circuit court capias, probation violations. Those often generate through court. So that's why our arrests were going back up in 22. Traffic statistics. So just a little bit of a backdrop on that. In 2020, of course, COVID started, and then in 2021, through legislative changes, the laws changed somewhat on what officers could and could not stop vehicles for. We lost a lot of primary offenses that we used to be able to stop for. But with that, we wanted to make sure that when we came back out in 2022, we increased our traffic initiatives. DUI arrests went back up 36, which was about 34% higher than the year prior. We had 489 more traffic stops in 2022. Citations went up, and approximately 45% of the traffic stops that we made alone were just for speeding. Some examples of some laws that changed that affected the ability to stop vehicles. Lighting, dangling objects, registrations and inspections, we were no longer allowed to stop unless they're on the first day of the 4th month. And also for a while we weren't allowed to have a primary stop for exhaust. That recently changed within the last year, but during that time in 2020 and 2021 especially, we weren't able to stop for a primary violation. Mental health stats, I won't spend much time on that since back in July you already had a presentation from Valley with Dr. McClanahan regarding the area's statistics and the crisis receiving center that the area is working on for us. Mental health calls for service spiked last year, a lot of it pandemic related. And when you break down, if you look at officer initiated emergency custody orders, those are ones where an officer has to physically take the person in custody to go to the hospital. If you take 95 calls, that can last up to 8 hours at a time. And then temporary detention orders, those are issued by the magistrate, and those require transportation. Most of the time it's by a police officer, and they can end up in a facility anywhere across the state. So 139 there as far as temporary detention orders. Leadership changes in the department. For this year, we had 2 senior members, Captain Becky Meeks and Captain J.W. Oliver, retired. With that, there was a domino effect of promotions. Just this year alone, back in the spring, we ran a promotion process internal to develop a eligibility list should we need to make promotions during this year, which we have. This year alone, since July, we have promoted 2 captains, 3 sergeants, and 3 corporals. And then there was related moves and changes with that, lateral changes, positions. So we were anticipating this. It was known that we were going to have leadership changes over the next few years, but nonetheless, it's significant anytime you take that on. So now what we're doing is change management as far as working through changes in leadership, people being in new positions, and related support to them as they learn their new roles. Current department staffing, we're allowed up to 49 officers. Currently, we have 40. Technically 41, but Captain Meek's official retirement date is this Friday. So we'll be at 40, which leaves us with 7 vacancies, or about 15%. 2 police officer positions out of the 49 are frozen. There are 27 officers assigned in the patrol division. When you break that down, 2 of them are in field training. We have 2 that are currently at the police academy. They'll graduate in November, and then they will move to field training. And we have 2 right now that are on light duty assignments. And we have 7 officers assigned to the investigations division. We also have a part-time officer in that division that helps with backgrounds and full-time crime analyst. And we have 5 officers that are assigned to the support services division, one of which right now is on active duty. And each division is supported by non-sworn or special officer staff in various positions throughout the department. That's going to be animal control, parking enforcement, operations technicians that work the front desk, records technicians. And then we have 8 auxiliary officers right now. 3 of them are what are called a level 1 auxiliary by DCJS. They're allowed to come out and operate independent as a full-time police officer. Years of experience, this is a breakdown of where our staff is right now. Of course, the outlier that draws the attention is officer, which that's for officers that aren't in supervision. Majority of them have 0 to 5 years of experience. That number, of course, looks like it sticks out. It's not uncommon in our industry right now to see that. Law enforcement as a whole is a difficult industry right now with recruitment and also with retention. So when we bring new officers on board, we spend a lot of time focusing on training them and also giving them the experience to build them up to make them competent and proficient officers. Recruitment. So what we've done the last year is we updated our imagery. For years we used a different analogy and banner as far as representation of what we had. We updated it, and what you see in front of you is 2 examples of that. These are created by people within our department. We found we have a lot of talent, especially with newer officers as far as electronic capabilities. We got fancy and started using a QR code, which has actually worked really well. If anybody needs to scan that, we're hiring. So also with that, using different imagery that the officers do to tie in what the city looks for with the slogan of where good nature comes naturally, and also showing a professionalism within our department and a new chapter that we're in right now. And of course our social media there's too. Another thing that we've done with recruitment that we're going to try here in the fall, which actually we're doing now and seeing a difference. As far as our application process, studies have found, and we've attended a few sessions this year that showed us that trying to front load getting all of the information from an applicant first versus getting the pedigree information and then using that to screen the applicant for an interview. We have found that by holding off on the personal history questionnaire and using that after the interview for the next step of a background, as opposed to using that to look at the candidate, we found a lot of applicants in reviews with them found it was too overwhelming just to get an interview. So we changed it up based off of some recommendations, and we're seeing an increase in applicants. Our next hiring process is in September, so we're hopeful to have larger interview numbers during that. The take-home vehicle and fleet program. Currently we have 48 vehicles that are in our fleet. That doesn't mean that they're all police cars. We have various different vehicles. Some of them are special service. The majority of them are assigned to patrol. Like I said before, all of our supervision, detectives, command staff all have take-home vehicles. And now we're working on the patrol officers are getting their vehicles now. What we ran into, which everybody has with manufacturers and availability, is everybody is slowed down right now, and then also they're trying to catch up. And then, of course, installers are limited and overwhelmed. So through no fault of our own, we're getting the cars and procuring them. It's just taking longer to receive them and get them online. We have an order in right now for 7 vehicles that have been on order since last spring, and only 3 of them just recently, as of last week, got VIN numbers assigned by Ford to build them. So they're coming along. It's just a little slower than most would like. We also, I'll touch again on this in a minute, that we got the ARPA grant to fund us potentially up to 5 other vehicles, but we have to wait until the pricing is released, so that way we can go through the procurement through the grant to purchase those. So where we're at in 2023, we also had our long-term evidence room tech. She retired. So when any time we have a retirement in the evidence room or that person leaves employment, we have to do a 100% audit of all the items in the evidence room. So we did that. Everything was found to be in good standing. We did a spring hiring process to fill vacancies, and of course our next one, like I just said, will be in September. I already talked about that we did the promotion process, so we went through that. We reclassified a position that we weren't able to fill up at the hospital, and we have that advertised for a part-time school resource officer to help us with the schools. What we found was when you're going for a part-time school resource officer, that opened us up to a different pool of applicants based off of their tenure and their careers. So we're trying to extract from that now to get an applicant there. We're continuing with professional development. Obviously, with a lot of promotions and changes, there's a lot that goes with that. So we've been working really hard internally to get everybody up to speed. Continue to participate in community outreach events, activities, and special events. We've done a lot this year. I apologize, I don't have the number of what we've come to so far this year, but the fall is getting ready to be another busy session. We just did a lot this summer as well. Social media, we've also been working on that, working with the city on continuing, of course, to work on recruitment, retention, salary, and benefits. And I already spoke about that. And we'll have our second Present Patrol coming in December of 2023. Last year we started working on that in October and November, and we've already had people knocking on our door this summer ready to go with that. So we'll likely be working on that beginning in September or October. But that's really been a very positive interaction with the community that we serve, and there's a lot of mutual interest in that. And so we think that's a great opportunity. And this year it's expanding, so that's great. Real quick, I touched on grants earlier, just to give you a number. So far, since 2022, we've secured $383,402 in grants for the department. We had first had the coronavirus grant in 2022, which afforded us the opportunity to buy a lot of safety mitigation equipment for safer interaction for the employees and for the public. We recently were able to secure a block grant through DCJS. We bought a new radar sign with speed data collection capability. One of the main purposes in getting that is when you put an officer out to run radar in an area where you have an alleged complaint of speeding, it can be difficult sometimes to capture whether or to discern if there's an issue there because it's only when the officer is there. The difference is with this new technology that we can have it there and it'll give us the data, and that'll help us in determining should we have an officer out there, and if so, what are the times and what kind of violations are we looking for. So one of the big things we're trying to do now between that with that kind of technology, using our data with heat maps and other extraction tools that we have to be able to better utilize our resources and put them where they're more needed. The ARPA grant, I already spoke about that. That helps us with our vehicles and also with getting some breaching kits for active violence situations. So this year is also the department's 125th anniversary. The official holiday, or I'm sorry, it's not a holiday. We can make it a holiday, but everybody can have a day off. On Wednesday, October 11th is the actual anniversary. However, I don't think everybody could make it if we, close shop in the middle of the week. So we are celebrating that on October 7th, which is the weekend before fall foliage. It will be open to the public. As far as the 125th anniversary, we're going to have displays in the parking lot. We're going to have some recognition of retirees and also affording them a meal and also some fellowship between us and the community. So weather cooperating, but if not, we have a contingency for that. We hope to see everybody out there, and that'll be a good time and celebrate the 125 years of the department that we're all very proud of. And with that, if I can answer any questions or discussion that you may have.
Are there any questions for Mr. Shaw? No questions. Thank you so much.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. And could you send us the presentation? Can you
Yes.
email us? Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Item 14 is to consider appointments and reappointments to various boards and commissions. Mr. Hamp, you have a list of those?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I'll walk the council through the various appointments, and then our goal would be that if council is comfortable with the candidates, to make the appointments with a single motion. So the first vacancy to consider is a vacancy on the Planning Commission. This fills an unexpired term that would end August 31st of 2025. And, I'm sorry, this is not an unexpired term. This is a full term that ends August 31st, 2025. And the only candidate that's presented for consideration is Mr. Philip Klon. Then we have the Library Board of Trustees, and the council is asked to consider appointing Ms. Megan Drummond. And that is an unexpired 4-year term ending August 31st, 2026. Then you have 2 appointment opportunities with the Economic Development Authority. Ms. Chanda McGuffin was appointed to an unexpired term earlier this year. She is eligible now for an appointment to a full 4-year term that would end August 31st, 2027. There's a vacancy created by the departure of an individual who has served 2 full terms and is not eligible for reappointment. Council is asked to consider Ms. Maggie Kelly for appointment there. The Cultural Commission has a vacancy. Ms. Tracy Strait had served on the Cultural Commission for 8 years. She was not eligible for reappointment when her last term expired. She has been away from the commission for a year and is eligible for appointment again. If appointed, she would serve a 4-year term that would conclude on August 31st, 2027. Mr. Jeff Ward has served on the Shenandoah Valley Airport Commission for a number of years. His current term is expiring, and he is eligible to serve a term. This is a 3-year term that would end August 31st, 2026. And finally, there are 3 individuals that are eligible for reappointment to the Redevelopment Housing Authority. Ms. Margaret Van Huss, Mr. Thomas Ryder, and Ms. Mary Scott Miller. Each of those individuals is eligible for a 4-year term that would end on August 31st, 2027.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp. Okay, are there any questions regarding the appointments?
Just a correction, it's Kelly Maji.
Okay,
Freaking EA.
thank you.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
And is there a motion to make the appointments?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wood, and is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And that passes 5-0. Item 15 is communication, correspondence, and calendar, and comments from our city manager. Mr. Hamp.
I do not have anything this evening.
Okay. Then item 16 is citizen comment period. Do we have anyone signed up to speak?
We do.
Okay,
Mr. Craig Scott.
okay.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor and honored councilmen and senior staff of the city. I'm at Ward B, 1616 Harmstead Road. Let me preface this, that often government is behind the curve. I'll give you an example. In the 1940s, 30s, and 50s, cigarettes were considered safe and actually encouraged by the federal government. With that in mind, we have a brain, and Lord knows we occasionally use it in discerning. The city is dumping fluoridated chemicals, often waste chemicals, into the city water at approximate cost of $12,000 a month, possibly less, possibly more. There are known carcinogens that have been documented for now scores of years. Also causes secondary and tertiary effects in the human body. Calcification and crystallization on the pineal gland. It has been documented that fluoride lowers, ingesting fluoride and its derivatives thereof acts as an adjuvant in compounds with other chemicals and lowers IQ. It is also a pollutant. It also causes fluorosis, my mouth's dry, pardon me, which causes bone maladies and teeth maladies. I urge the council to consider just ceasing the adding into the water supply. And it would save money and increase health benefits. Fluoride is used in dentistry, but only as a topical solution, not for ingesting. And even then, it should be used extremely limitedly. It has been known for generations now as a toxic. The CDC has come around, as international groups throughout the world. Richmond's behind the curve on this, but there's no reason we don't have to be. I thank you so much. I can also save the city a lot of money on the breakdown of equipment if we decide to eventually go to a private style water system. Anyway, I hope we have questions. Everybody has my email. I thank you, and I will be leaving this fair city, and I have other opportunities which you will hear about this spring. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll be in Augusta County, though. Have a good day.
Do we have anyone?
Donna Yobs.
Hi, I just wanted to make a quick comment on item 11. One is I agree with the need for more housing in this community. Happy to see an apartment building being proposed. I like the location close to transportation. I have a couple concerns. One is with the exceptions they're asking the city to make, I would really like to see them make some concessions because they're asking us to make concessions on the density, on the height and such. And I think a community benefit that we could ask for is that some of those apartments be affordable. It's a huge need in the city. Other groups may be asking for other things like more park fees. There are lots of things, but I think the city should definitely be looking for a community benefit for making concessions for them. The only other thing is the report talks about pedestrian crosswalks. I just ask, are those lighted? Because in that area, it'd be good to have the crosswalk lighted, whether it's just embedded in the sidewalk, in the asphalt, or above ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay.
She wasn't there. So can I?
Yes, I'll allow it.
I won't take up your time for that long. My name's Andrea Jackson from Ward A. I just want to say hello. How are y'all? It's getting ready to be Labor Day on Monday, so summer is over. I've been on vacation, but I'm back, and more than ever interested in housing issues and improving the community in Waynesboro. I don't have anything to say but to remind the City Council that a representative of Virginia Organizing emailed you to a housing visual that we're having on September the 9th at the new church, Christ Tabernacle Church, which used to be the Basic United Methodist Church over on Delphine, or right across from Fairfax Hall. And so we had one in January, and it was right after the prayer visual at the YMCA, and so it was kind of in conflict, and so like we're just making it known that we are inviting all of y'all and publicly inviting you, and then I'm also giving y'all like a flyer as well, so you'll know. So anyway, that's it. That's my time, and I hope to see y'all there. I hope y'all have a good Labor Day, and I hope the rest of the year that we can continue to work together to make Waynesboro a better place.
Thank you. And that's all, okay. Mr. Hamp, if we could revisit the appointments and various boards and commissions. We did overlook the Youth Commission. I did email you earlier about the withdrawal for the Cultural Commission, but the Youth Commission is still up for appointment, and Ms. Sharon Fitz has put in her application for that. Can we go ahead and vote?
You would do that this evening?
Yes, that was, should have been included earlier.
Suits me, Madam Mayor.
Is that acceptable? Okay, so I'd like to ask for a motion to appoint Sharon Fitz to the Youth Commission.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee, and do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Wood. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And she's appointed to the Youth Commission. Thank you. And that brings us to item 17, and that's to conduct a closed session under sections 2.2, 3711. And do I have a motion to go into closed session?
Madam Mayor, I move this meeting be recessed and that the City Council of Waynesboro immediately reconvene in a closed meeting in order to discuss the acquisition of real property to be used by the city for municipal offices and the relocation or expansion of business or industry in the Nature's Crossing Technology Center where no previous announcement has been made as authorized by sections 2.2-3711A 5 and 2.2-3711A 3 of the Code of Virginia.
Okay, thank you for that motion, and do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee. Any discussion? This requires a roll call vote. Ms. Bortle?
Mayor Williams?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood?
Aye.
Councilman Allen? Aye. Councilman Short?
Aye.
Councilman Lee?
Aye.
Okay. We're in closed session. Motion, we return to open session and certify the closed session.
Madam Mayor, I move to adopt the following resolution. Whereas the City Council of Waynesboro has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia requires certification by the City Council that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law, now therefore be it resolved that the City Council of Waynesboro hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification resolution applies, and two, only such business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the City Council of Waynesboro.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Any discussion? Okay, this requires a roll call vote. Ms. Bortle?
Mayor Williams?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Wood?
Aye.
Councilman Allen? Councilman Short?
Aye.
Councilman Lee?
Aye.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bortle. And that brings us to item 19. Mr. Allen, would you like to make the motion to adjourn?
My pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Do I have a second?
I will second that.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. All in favor, say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.